Welcome to Now You See TV. Today's episode, Winter or Sabbath, and the start of the Great Tribulation. I'm your host, Jake Grant, and I'm pleased to welcome back to Now You See TV, Steve Moutria of TorahFamily.org. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Jake, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. And
Good.
I'm excited to dive into this topic. We had you on previously about No More Delay was the title of that particular interview. And you had some fascinating things you brought up about a timeline we can see in regards to the Great Tribulation period and the second coming of the Messiah. And so you have some more information that you've been diving into this particular topic, and it's in relation to the winter or Sabbath. And we're going to be breaking into this, and I'm really excited because these topics are always fascinating for both me and the audience. And so will the time of the Antichrist be the time to flee the Antichrist be in the winter or on the Sabbath? And is this why the words of the Messiah warned us to pray our flight would not take place during this time, because we would want to escape before the proverbial clock strikes midnight? So, Steve, let's get into this topic, winter or Sabbath.
Yeah, that has been a phrase that I think all of us, when we read it, it's in, I got my notes here, it's Matthew 24:20. And pray your flight does not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. And it has been, I don't want to call it cryptic, but I can't think of another word. So a mysterious phrase that he's given us. We think, man, what does that mean? And I'm still not convinced we know fully. I think we all have ideas, and that's why I want to present today here's some thoughts. Maybe we can consider this. One thing that I have heard, and I believed for a long time, and I'm not saying it's wrong even to this day, but I lean away from it a little bit, and that is that when it says that your flight does not take place on the Sabbath, we always think that's what it means the Sabbath day, of course, right? And again, I'm not opposed to it, but I just kind of lean towards, I think it's actually talking about a Sabbath year, okay? And the Jubilee is a Sabbath year according to Leviticus. And so when it talks about the winter or the Sabbath, he's talking about a season of a year, I think, and that being the Jubilee year. And now, am I right? Well, who knows? But I do think it's a perspective that a lot of people are either just not seeing or overlooking, and so I like to just put that on the table for us to chew on. Maybe it's not talking about a day, but the Sabbath year. And as you mentioned, this is kind of a pickup from that teaching that we did, I guess a month or so ago now, No More Delay. And in that teaching, we talked about, the timeline, and it's there on our website still. If you go to our teachings page, you can go look up the I squealed the No More Delay, and it's there underneath that teaching, the whole timeline. And here's the thing. I've had so many people talk to me, and friends, close friends, people who I don't even know, saying the year 2017, it's got to be that, And then we know 2017 came and went, nothing happened. But the problem is that the Hebraic year of 2017, if I can say it, think of it this way. In 2017, well, the year didn't start in January. It's that year started in the spring, April, March, April, whatever. I don't know how it fell last year, but right in that time frame. So we are right now currently in that Hebraic year of what happened in 2017. So all of the events that people have looked back in, saying how 2017 has, symbolic references back, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, 120 years ago. And so my point in all of that is that year is not up yet. The Gregorian year is up, sure, but let's look at the Hebraic year, and that ends in the springtime of this year. So I was just talking to a fellow minister of ours, and this morning, and he was saying, surely, all these things that happened on those specific years back in the day, and then now we get to 2017 where all those seems to be pointing to right now. And is he going to just say, well, that was all for nothing? Okay, sure, it may be for nothing, but that's a hard pill to swallow. Surely there's something we're looking at. And I was talking to some friends just yesterday, and they were saying how there's just so much going on in the world. I didn't even know what was going on, and I want to say what was, but evidently some things with Russia and now Great Britain are all intense. I'm going, what are you talking about? Because we don't have a TV, or don't watch TV, I should say, and all this stuff is going on. I had no clue, and I'm going, man, it just seems like there's so much. And anyone who watches on my ministry or stuff that I do, I try to stay away from current events because they can heat up and then they can calm down. I've seen it happen so many times. And so, though I think we should be mindful of what's going on, because obviously things are going on, but we've seen things go on before, right? And nothing happened. So that's why I ask is that, for watching current events, be mindful. They've heated up and calmed down before. But with the season that we're in, coming to the end of a Hebraic year, a significant Hebraic year, I believe, regarding all these time frames, the 120, the 170, 50, all coming to a conclusion now. So it does seem like there's some things and reasons to be watching. And as we mentioned also in that last teaching, talking about how the significance of the 70 years, how Yahweh was angry with Israel for these last 70 years. Well, there's no time in history that I have seen that Yahweh would be angry with Israel for 70 years, except for these 70 years that we've been seeing now. And the question would be, why? Well, because they have not made Torah the law of the land. The law of the land in Israel, the land of Israel right now, is not much different from what the United States has. Yeah, it's got the differences. It's got the Knesset versus the government and this, that, and the other. But still, it's set up in a very like manner. So the bottom line is Torah is not the law of the land. So there's a reason why Yahweh would be angry at his people, being who is in his land, not setting the Torah up. So it's one more perspective for us to be looking at. This is a significant year. And in that timeline that we discussed, again, no more delay. And the timeline is still on our website, and along with all of the notes for those who want to look at it there. And it's under, right now it's currently under the most recent teachings and under the live teachings on our teachings page. We had the 1,335 starting on Ash Wednesday. The 1,290 starts on Easter, and then which is the current Jewish calendar Passover, which a lot of people are following. And I want to say this. I said that in that last teaching. I want to say it again here. I'm not saying everyone else's calendar is wrong if you're not following ours. It's so not the case. Okay. There's so many different calendars out there, and I've looked at them all, and I respect them because every calendar has got great. Man, it's great. It makes perfect sense, and that's what we think with ours as well. So I'm not declaring everyone else's calendar is wrong. At this time, it's just I'm not fully on board with theirs just yet. And ours, of course, makes the most sense to me right now. Ask me tomorrow, I may change. Okay. So if someone is following a different calendar and you're watching this, please know I'm not condemning any other calendar. That's so not the issue. I'm just simply saying this is what I've found, and it all has fallen with the calendar that we're currently on. Maybe you want to consider looking at it and maybe even seeing how these timeframes will line up with your calendar. So when I'm saying that, please know that I'm not condemning any calendar out there. But on this calendar, the 1,290 starts on Easter, which happens to fall on the Jewish Passover of this year. And then the 1,260 starts on what would be our Passover. And then the last 5 months of which we find in Revelation 9, that starts at second Passover on our calendar, ending with Sukkot on Halloween. So you have all these things lining up on certain pagan days just as much as Yahweh's holy days. And so the question is, I had a friend, I was talking to him, said, Steve, the Ash Wednesday came and went, nothing happened, and that's where we started digging. And I want to preface this by saying, we all know that the resurrection is first given. Well, I don't know if it's first given, but it was definitely given to us in the book of Daniel, chapter 12. And I think I have it here. Yeah, Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 through like 2 or 3. You can go there and you'll see where it talks about this resurrection taking place. And it says, well, here, I'll just read it verbatim for you. It says, verse 1, I'll go from there. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. And it says, at that time, Michael, the great prince, who protects your people, will arise. And I want to hit pause because that word in Hebrew for arise is actually omed. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. And it means to stand, to cease. A lot of people will look at that in the English and say he'll rise and he'll start fighting. No, he's fighting now. Okay. At this moment in time, he will stand. Meaning to stand at ease. Okay. He stops fighting. And that's when all hell breaks loose. Okay. I think there's a misunderstanding with that Hebrew word for a lot of people. And I'm not declaring myself as right, but to what I'm looking at, this makes far more sense that the word means to simply stand still, to not fight. He in other words, he lets the sword go down and lets Satan have his way, if you will. And as a side note, I actually believe that is where it says, the restrainer. I believe Michael is the restrainer. He's restraining right now, and then he's taken out of the way. He's allowed to stand still, and the enemy that moment goes full throttle. So that was a side note. Sorry. So continuing with the verse, it says, there will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of the nations until then. Again, that's because he ceases to fight Michael and he lets the enemy have his way. Then the reading, continuing with the verse, it says, but at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Then verse 2, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. So here we see the resurrection, and you see both resurrections mentioned here at the same time. And this is my point. So a prophet shows something and it's all wrapped up together. Whereas when we read in the New Testament, we see this event separated, meaning the first resurrection and the second resurrection. Paul mentions it in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, starting around verses, I'm going to say 20, 21, 22. He starts explaining the resurrections. Okay. And the first resurrection happens at the parousia of Yeshua. And then the second resurrection happens at the end. This parallels what we find in Revelation chapter 20. Okay. Mentioning the exact same thing. First resurrection and the second resurrection taking place at the end of the millennium. Now I say all of that because in our teaching, we've discussed how we were looking at possibly the 1335 starting with this massive event. And in that event, okay, it's Ezekiel chapter 9. Am I going too fast, Jake? Or are you with me so far?
I would say for those who are just catching this interview, break down exactly where the 1335 and kind of explain those terms as you're going through this so they can kind of connect what these are on the timeline.
Gotcha. Okay. In Daniel, that same chapter 12, Daniel brings up two different timelines or time frames that we don't find anywhere else in the scriptures that I know of that lists it verbatim. And that is the 1,335 days and the 1,290 days. He mentions the 1,290 first. And he says that, I'm going to paraphrase, I don't have it in front of me. Again, Daniel chapter 12. He says that from the time the abomination is set up, that there will be 1,290 days. Okay. And then after that, it says, blessed is he who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. Okay. So those two times are only mentioned, again, that I know of in Daniel chapter 12. So up to, here recently, for me anyway, I've always seen everyone saying the 1,290 goes past the 1,260. And the 1,260 is given to us in, obviously Revelation. I think Yeshua mentions it. I don't know if he mentions it verbatim by the number of days. I know the 42 months are mentioned in times, and half of times. But we know the 1,260 is definitely associated with the time of the tribulation. That being when the Antichrist is given authority to conquer the saints. And that's given in Revelation chapter 13. Now, a lot of times I've seen people, and I've done it too, we say the 1,290 goes 30 days after that time frame. And then the 1,035 goes like that extra 75 days longer. And as I started digging into it, I'm thinking, wait a minute, maybe they all end at the same day and they all start at different time frames. And that's what this timeline goes on. It's under the assumption, mind you, okay, that the 1290 starts first, and that would be the timing of the sealing. And then you'll have the 1290 start, and that starts when the abomination is set up. And then he's given authority to conquer the saints at the time of Easter, or I'm sorry, at the time of would be Passover, that I call the original Passover. Okay. So hopefully I clarified a little bit for you there, Jake. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that did. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, cool. Okay. So the question is, if nothing happened on that timeline at the 1335, like the timeline even says possible earthquake or this could start, because Ezekiel chapter 9, verses 3 through 5, it's where you see this is like where everything begins. And I started looking at it. We see an event take place, two things. In verse 3, you see where a man, assumably an angel, says he's dressed in linen, goes out and puts a seal on the foreheads of these people. Okay. Well, that lines up with what we see in Revelation chapter 7. Like in Revelation chapter 7, starting around verse 3 or 4, you see where the angel says, wait a minute, don't do anything. We got to put the seal of God, Yahweh, on the foreheads of his servants, the 144,000. So, but what do we see? Why does he say, wait, don't do anything yet? Well, you backtrack. If we take away the chapter, different, a lot of time we get this different chapter, different thought. We need to remove that mentality from our thoughts here. Okay, it's not different chapter, different thought. It's all written as a storyline right there anyway. Okay, granted, Revelation jumbles all over. Okay, but because of how the angel says, wait a minute, to what just took place, first let's do this. That means this event, the sealing, takes place before what? The sixth seal, which is written just in the previous verses. The sixth seal is all about judgment, the moon turning to blood red, and all this stuff taking place. So there we see an element of what would have been together, New Testament separates. Well, what do we see back in what the prophets said? Just like with Daniel and the resurrection. Daniel puts both resurrections together. New Testament separates them. Well, here a prophet, Ezekiel, puts verses 3 through 5. We see where the sealing, marking on the heads, okay, but then immediately after verse 5, we see where he goes into where this judgment and destruction of those who are evil. Now, evil meaning those who are not following Torah, although they know it. Okay, I have a teaching I just made called Evil People. If you haven't seen that, please see that. It explains how Yahweh defines evil. Okay, and so here we see Ezekiel putting this event, a sealing on the forehead and a judgment happening at the same time. But Revelation seems to show it's separated, and it first happens with them being sealed. And so my question is, could the 1,035, as listed on that timeline, be when the sealing begins? Now, the question that takes place then is, when does the judgment that's mentioned here in Ezekiel, when does that happen? When is it delayed? How long is that delayed for? Well, then you see the angel saying, hey, there's no more delay. So there's a time whenever everything is set in place to be. And that being said, I think there's just so much to consider with this, because I think Ezekiel is now split up. These verses, we're now seeing evidence. This is an event that's separated. And I don't know, there's just so much that I look at. If I can read this verse for us real quick. Because when I look at this, I'm gonna read from Ezekiel chapter 9, and I'm gonna read verse 5 for us. Okay, this is the time of the judgment. It says, as I listened, he said to the others, because he just got done about sealing the foreheads. He said to the others, follow him throughout the city and kill without showing pity or compassion. Slaughter old men, young men, maidens, women, and children, but do not touch anyone who has the mark. Okay, begin at my sanctuary. He says, begin at my sanctuary. And then it says, so they began with the elders. Okay, those who are in authority, those who have position, those who know, if you will. And then it says, who are in front of the temple. I was reading that just today, And I'm going, wait a second, this is like lining up with what I read in Daniel. Okay. So Daniel, okay, before I go to Daniel, am I going too fast, Jake? Are you with me?
Yeah, I'm on board.
Okay, cool. Okay. I'm going to hit pause there because I know I'm feeding lots of information. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay. So, well, in Daniel, the reason why that caught me, it says it started with the elders. That's where he started with. Okay. And I'm going, that lines up with the verse I've read in Daniel. So I had to look it up real quick. And it's in Daniel chapter 8. And it says, I'm going to read a few verses here. So bear with me. Hopefully, and Lord willing, it'll make sense. This is Daniel chapter 8, starting in verse 9. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small, but grew in power to the south and to the east toward the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the host of the heavens. Now, the host of the heavens. I know when we look at starry host and host of heavens, we think of the stars, but the host of the heavens, we are citizens, our citizenship is in heaven, correct? Yes. So we are citizens of heaven. We are the host. If you're a believer, you are the host of heaven. Okay. So kind of dwell on that as I'm reading here. So it grew until it reached the host of the heavens. Now remember also, Revelation talks about he was given authority to do what? Conquer the saints, the host of the heavens. Moving forward in Daniel, it says, and it grew, it threw some of the starry host down. Now, this is where a lot of people go into the mentality of it's the stars and, throwing it down. It's the starry host. If the host of heaven are indeed the believers, those who are in the kingdom, the heaven, the starry host is going to be who? The leadership. So just as we see in Ezekiel, the judgment begins with who? The house of the Lord. We see here in Daniel saying the exact same thing. Judgment starts in the house of the Lord, the starry host. Those are it's the leadership that gets attacked first. And so again, it's in Revelation 13, verse 5, where it goes into where he's given authority to conquer them. So as I read this, I'm thinking, man, this is all lining up perfectly. So my wondering is, did the 1335 begin of the sealing of the saints that we read in Ezekiel 9:3? And now we're waiting for this event to take place that's going to begin the judgment. And that's kind of like the question, where are we at now? And is this the time for it to be? And this leads us into the question of Yeshua's statement. Pray your flight does not take place in winter or the Sabbath. Now, I say that because think of what Yeshua said in Luke 21:36. Luke 21:36 says, pray that you may be able to escape all these things and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man. Well, to stand before the Son of Man is marriage language. That's the marriage, okay? To stand before him, just like they did at the foot of the mountain, and when they came out of Egypt and they're entering into the covenant. That was when they stood before him, okay? Same thing here. Yeshua is saying, pray you will escape all these things and enter into the new covenant, to stand before him. So my wondering is, back to Matthew 24, the winter and the Sabbath. Is this when that time frame begins? Is the spring time, the equinox, is that the time frame that there's no more time, there's no more delay, it now begins? Because we're waiting for that moment in time at this very present, I think. And if it's not this year, I still think this timeline can be applied to a year in the future, and this understanding of how it all works out. The sealing starts first, and then it gets cut off, and then the judgment starts. So again, whether this timeline truly fits this year, what's yet to be seen. But I still think there's a parallel that we need to apply to future years and an understanding to see what calendar does it flow in with then, or what year will it happen? I guess that's what I'm asking for, is to be open to see how this can apply to future years, if not this year. And so that being said, we know that the equinox, okay, it falls this year on March 20th. Okay. What I want to try and do is explain a few things on some understandings, different understandings that people have. And I may, if I may get some people wrong, okay, so I'll do my best to present them of how I know and how I understand them to be. I believe Yahweh's time frame is always going to be with Jerusalem. Excuse me. I think that's the time clock, if you will. So it's not going to, it's not going to be when the equinox happens over here on this part of the world or this part of the world here. It always starts with Jerusalem, and I can be wrong. I just feel it just makes the most sense. Okay. So that being said, the equinox this year falls on March 20th, and it falls after sunset. Okay. That's significant for me because I know some people will say, well, if it happens, at this time, well, that's when it happens. Or if this time, that's when it happens. Well, it falls after sunset. So that means it happens on the 21st officially in Israel time frame because it's after sunset. It falls on the next day. That's when the equinox falls. So the equinox, the sign for the equinox lands, therefore, on March 21st. Making the next day, the following day, the first day of spring, making March 21st the last day of winter. So lots of perspectives to consider and how we're going to interpret the equinox and how do we interpret when's the first day of spring. That's my current understanding. It's not necessarily the day when it happens. It's the following day that it all lands into place. Now, Jake, that's a lot to try to explain. Did I make that clear at least a little bit?
Yeah. So you're saying that since the equinox is happening that evening of the 20th, then technically the equinox is happening on the 21st in terms of how Jews in Israel would view the day and how Hebrews view the day starting in the evening.
Correct.
The first day of spring would be the following day,
which makes it the 22nd.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. And I know there's a big debate too, well, when does the day truly start? And I see those perspectives, and I'm not saying they're wrong, though I'm struggling with that still. So I'm just going with the mindset where I'm at right now. The day starts in the evening. Okay. So now, all that being said, looking at this, I can't help but wonder is this what we're to be looking at? Yeshua said, pray your flight does not take place in the winter or in the Sabbath. Now, I know that there are some who will say, well, you know what? It's all going to be in the fall. That's when it really starts. And he's saying, pray your flight doesn't take place in the winter. So therefore, pray it takes place before the winter. Okay. And I'm with that. Trust me, I'm all about trying to see when things are going to start. If you watched any of my teachings, I show different perspectives that it can start in the spring or it could start in the fall just the same. Where is it going to happen? That's why I always pray that we should just be open and keep things on the table. Let's just pray things through. Don't be locked, and solid on one perspective. We need to be open because we all know we've been wrong on something before, and odds are we're going to be wrong on something again. So let's just be open about it. And what I do struggle with is that to say, pray that your flight does not take place in the winter or the Sabbath. When I hear people say that we can change that time, I struggle with that because Revelation, and I'm failing to remember where it's at this moment, but it says there's a day, a month, and a year, and it even breaks it down to an hour, okay, that has been set in place. It can't change. That, in fact, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to find it now. If I refer to something, I feel like I got to look it up. I don't want people to think I'm just throwing something out of nowhere. So give me 2 seconds here. Hour, day, month, year. There's one verse that's got all of those. One verse has hour, day, month, and year all in it together. And it's Revelation chapter 9:15. So that's the verse where we see there is a specific day of a year, of a month, and an hour of that day even that is set in place. It can't change. So no matter how hard we pray, that day is not going to change. So what I'm thinking here is that it's set in place and it's going to be in the winter. So pray your flight does not take place in the winter. So pray that, it's things are going to happen, I think, in the winter time frame. And now, will it happen at the beginning or the end? Yet to be seen. And that's where we get into is it the spring things, spring feast or fall feast when things kick in gear? That's the debate. And I don't want to say debate. I don't like using that word. That's the challenge we're all faced with, trying to understand and trying to see where's it going to happen. And so, that being said, I really believe that we're looking at right now, under the spring understanding, we need to have our eyes opened, because spring is upon us. And, and if it's not this year, we still need to keep this all understanding as for possible years in the future with the fall as well. But I guess I'm just trying to say, let's be open, folks. We need to keep our eyes open, because right now, if that 1335 starts with the sealing, we're waiting for the event of the Great Tribulation, not the Great Tribulation, but the beginning of the birth pains. Because Yeshua did make a distinction. There's birth pains that start first, and then you have the tribulation thereafter. And I'm wondering, when will these birth pains kick in gear? And according to Matthew 24, I think it's around verse 7-9, right in that area, he says this will be the beginning of the birth pains. And that's, nation against nation, the earthquake in diverse places. It says diverse places, but it's actually, the word there is kata, topos in the Greek, and it actually means according to the writings, according to the scriptures, according to this, and so, meaning according to the prophets. He's basically saying, according to what's been said, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be a major earthquake, and earthquakes all over in one place, and so that's kind of where I'm wondering is, could things begin in this Sabbath year, in the fall, or I'm sorry, in the winter time frame still? That's what we need to be open to. Now, that being said, I still believe, the perspective that many will hold to, and I'm not saying it's wrong, about the Sabbath day. Very possible. If that's the case, then, man, you've only got this coming Sunday, for as far as when this is being recorded, that's would be the time frame. And that's very possible. I'm very open to that. Though I struggle with it, I can still see it. Does that all make sense, Jake, what I've been saying so far?
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder if it's almost twofold, because we see that the Messiah's words are saying, pray that your flight doesn't take place at this point of time.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of gives me the impression that this is going to be the last minute time for you to escape the Antichrist, because if you stick around, he's going to get you. And so
Right.
the people who have already prayed that their flight doesn't take place during the winter on the Sabbath, will have already left or gotten to their safety location.
However it works out.
And so I'm wondering if it's twofold, that there's a time period in the winter right before the spring and the spring feasts that kickstarts this whole thing. And the people who are paying attention and who have prepared themselves and who are being aware, they start to see the puzzle pieces moving around, especially during the spring feasts. And it really starts kicking in at the end of that winter. And so they have this full year of feasts to see all these moving puzzle pieces. They become aware that times are now upon us. And then by Sukkot, let's say, they have already made their escape. They've already made their time to dwell in the wilderness. And then those who have completely ignored all the signs, completely rejected the biblical feasts as times that we should be paying attention to and getting on God's calendar, and instead perhaps holding on to traditional holidays, completely rejecting what we see kind of prepares us. We see in Paul's writing, he says, I don't need to write to you the day or the hour. You already know these things. You know the biblical timeline of the feasts and how these relate to the second coming. The people who are ignoring that, they're going to be sticking around where they're at in the following winter.
It's possible.
The people who have been paying attention and they see this starting to get kickstarted, perhaps whether the previous winter or during that year during the feast, they are already out of the system.
Right.
place of preservation. And so those who have ignored it and didn't have, maybe perhaps this is an oil in the lamp type scenario where they didn't stay awake during the watch. They weren't paying attention to the times, and then they get stuck during a harsh, awful winter period when the Antichrist is coming down on them. Perhaps the day that the order goes out is on a Sabbath day, or of course, if 2018 is still considered a Jubilee year.
Well, until the spring, what I'm saying.
Whenever, if their flight takes place, perhaps that's when the Antichrist really makes that push on a Sabbath day or on in the winter.
That's a good thing, and that you're saying, because there's lots of questions. I'm the more I study, I think I get an answer. I go, okay, this brings up two more questions. The because something that Paul said in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, what verse is it now? I got to find it. Sorry. 2 Thessalonians 2. And he talks about, concerning the coming of the Yeshua. And it's talking about the parousia, mind you, there too. And it says the coming. So he says, even before that happens, it says the Antichrist will be revealed first. So that's kind of like, I'm going, well, my stars, what's that mean? Because to me, my mindset is, if he's revealed beforehand, the question is, how? Is he revealed as the anti-Messiah, which would wake every single person up in the world, and who's at least a believer, or is he just revealed? There he is, and only those who truly are pursuing will recognize him as such. I don't know, but the thing is, I think that in any timeline someone wants to draw up, or it be a general like this one or specific, we can't throw this verse out. There's something, the anti-Messiah is going to be revealed somehow, some way, and maybe, like you said, only those who have the oil in their lamps are going to recognize it. I don't know. That's an interesting perspective, but something we have to keep in mind. That's for sure. Something that I've been looking at regarding, because I'm all about history being cyclical. It's always repeating, always, it seems, and maybe not verbatim, but there's always those storylines, or it's always there. It's always going to happen in a similar fashion, similar ways. And I looked at when Yahweh, when he confirmed the covenant on Shavuot, back when they came out of Egypt. Well, what happened? They all stood before the mountain. They all said, this is what's going to happen. And that's what, they agreed to it. And it's in, I've got it here somewhere, Exodus 24. Let me read this for you. I really think it's cool. Verses 9 of Exodus 24. It says, Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of sapphire, clear as the sky itself. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God and they ate and drank. So what were they doing? They were confirming the covenant with the meal. It is so cool. And I'm going, wow, this is like, what are we talking about when we read Revelation? We're talking about the marriage. What else do we read? The marriage supper of the Lamb. It's the confirming of the new covenant with the marriage supper of the Lamb. It's all cyclical again. And I get excited when I see things like that. I'm sorry, you may have seen it already before, and I never saw it before, but I just think it's crazy cool when you see, things like that, and how we're invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb, that confirming of the covenant, the new covenant. And man, I can't wait for that day. So, but in essence, Jake, that's really the biggest stuff that I wanted to present right there, is that, understanding just how Daniel shows both resurrections as one, the New Testament separating them. Likewise with, we read in Ezekiel, as I gave here in Ezekiel 9, I think it was, the whole point where he shows everything together, but the New Testament shows it separated. And right now we could be in that time frame of the sealing. And maybe it's just me, but it seems like since the last Sukkot, there's been a lot going on in the world. Not just in the world, I'm talking in the world of believers. Let's just, kind of zero in a little bit. The world of the believers. I've seen so much tension, hatred, bitterness, strife, people just, bailing, if you will. I'm done with this Torah thing. Or those who have just left Yeshua. It seems like it's all really been coming to a climax since this last Sukkot. And maybe it's just me seeing it and it's been around for a lot longer. I don't know. But since then, I have just seen things like that. And I got a confession here. I was this last about a week or two ago. I was trying to think about things, where we're at in time, where we're at in history. And I woke up in the morning and I just laid there in bed and I was staring at my ceiling, just praying, saying, Father, where are we at? I need understanding. And I guess I don't need it. I guess it's more so I just want it, and I feel like we're missing something, I had just come to the understanding of finding this element of how Ezekiel 9, the two events, the sealing and the judgment all together is actually separated right there in Revelation 6 and 7. And I was all excited about it and just trying to pray about it. And I'm laying there and I was reminded of a dream I had. This is going to sound silly, but I had like 20 years ago. I wasn't even following Torah, nothing like this, but I had this dream. So if I can share this, and I'm not saying it's prophetic, I'm just saying it's what maybe just spoke to me, what I needed maybe. Because when I had the dream, I wrote it down. I was real big on, I still do write dreams down, but I haven't had a lot here lately. But came to my remembrance. And the dream goes like this. In my dream, I'm driving down this road, a very familiar road that I knew from where I grew up. And my mom was with me in the car. And we're driving. And we're driving away. Our mindset is we're driving as fast as we can away from this major storm. And I remember looking back and seeing the storm. The clouds were just so dark and gloomy, beyond gloom, as you can imagine. And it was racing towards us. And I remember it was getting so windy, our car was like almost being blown off the road. And so we got out of the car and said, we got to find a place of refuge here. And as we got out of the car, I looked back and I see these tornadoes all coming towards us, and we're all within this storm. And I remember in the dream counting the tornadoes. And I remember when I got done counting, I said, there's 18 of them. There's 18. I'm yelling in the dream because it's so loud, the wind. There's 18 of them. Well, immediately the scene changed. And the next thing I know, I'm helping these people get down into like this manhole, if you will, like a tunnel, if you will. And the hole is open that I get down in, and I got this flashlight and I'm helping people come in. And towards the latter part, is like all of a sudden I see a person here or a person there. They come out. They actually get out of the tunnel, if you will. And I'm trying to stop them, going, what are you doing? What are you doing? You can't do that, And I said, don't you see what's out there? And but all the main time, there's still people coming in, but you'll see one or two people leaving. And then I woke up. And that was a dream that came to my remembrance just last week. And it hit me. And this is what came to me for me. And whether I'm wrong or right, I don't know. But I was thinking the 18 tornadoes, could that be, just wondering, the year 2018, it's coming in and it's coming and it's getting closer. And it's representing the storm of the Lord is going to hit. And then with the flashlight that I had, it was like represented, if you will, our little ministry here at Torah Family. It's like trying to help people. And as I'm helping people, suddenly you'll see one or two people coming out and they get out of the safety, if you will. And as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, is this the people who I'm seeing who are denying Yeshua completely, and people who are just, denying Torah and saying, is that? I don't know. But man, as I was thinking on it, it hit me. I almost got goosebumps as I was thinking about it. I'm going, oh my stars, is that what he was showing me 20 years ago? And here we are. I don't know. I don't know. It ministered to me for that moment. And time will tell obviously. And then if it comes and goes, maybe we get to 2019 and suddenly I get a better understanding of it. I don't know. But all I can say is there's so much pointing to this year. And I don't want to have my eyes closed and go, la, 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 just give me happy stuff. I don't want to do that. I want to be ready if this is it. And I pray that we all have that mindset of watch and pray. Regardless of what time it may be, we should all be watching and praying. And with that alone, we should all have our ears open and just you know what, let's just pray. And I was speaking to that same minister friend earlier today, and I was sharing with him my perspective of the 1 year time frame, and he was struggling with it. No, you're doing it with that. I go, you know what, brother? And it was so funny because I respect him so much. Great guy. And I never had a chance to talk to him. It was the first time talking. We had a great time talking with one another. And the thing is, everything he was saying was what I used to believe just so many years ago. And so, and the thing is, if I can say this, no matter what our perspective of eschatology or this viewpoint or that is not salvational. Okay. Trust me, when Yeshua comes, we're going to find out we're all wrong on something. Okay. And so, I just pray that, all of us have that open heart, because what I've seen in since Sukkot, there's a bitterness rising in people over some things. I was like, why? I'm not getting this. And maybe I'm just blinded to it. I don't know. But my prayer for all of us is that we have a heart to follow him, because the days we are in are not getting any lighter. They're only getting darker. And my concern is that bitterness and hatred are stemming out within people. And man, we've got to do away with that. If there's anything in your heart that you're struggling with against somebody, or you've got a bitter attitude, well, I'll just do this or whatever, folks, get rid of it, please. This is not a time to be dilly-dallying. Even if we have another so many years or whatever, he's sifting through his people. I believe right now, as I've said before, all of us are going to fall into one of the 7 churches of Revelation when the end begins. When it begins, we will all fall into one of those 7 categories. And I pray that we are all in the Church of Philadelphia. Now, I'm not naive enough to know to think that's going to happen, but that's my prayer, that, we open up, because it's the church of forgiveness, the church of brotherly love is where we have to be. And that means showing love in everything. And I'll stop there. You got any questions or anything, Jake?
One of your topics that you brought up is this concept of Michael being the restrainer and fighting right at this moment. And I can't even remember the interview, but we had a fascinating insight shared on our program regarding all the darkness and things that are being exposed and brought to light, not only here in the United States, but worldwide. And it seems to be that this great battle that is happening in the spiritual realm is reflecting in the physical realm.
Amen. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. I agree. Yes.
It's exciting, because if it is that Michael's kicking Satan's butt up there, just imagine the things that are going to be exposed. I mean, it's terrible to think about what's been going on underneath the covers. But
right.
The fact that it will come out to light, and that before he gives up and stands down, that these things are happening at this moment, and that there's this spiritual connection between this battle going on in the heavens against these principalities and these fallen entities that is reflected here on earth, with people waking up to truth, with people realizing the validity of Torah in their walk as believers, and all of these types of things that are starting to really catch fire today. It's really exciting.
Amen. No, you nailed it. And it's funny too, because I think we brought this up in the last teaching. I can't remember. The word apocalypse, which is given to us in Revelation, that means unveiling. Okay. And so I think at the unveiling, every eye will see him. Okay. But will they recognize him as him? They'll see him, but will they recognize it as such? Will there just be a big bright light in the sky and they don't know what it is? And then the enemy tries to reason away. Well, that was just this nuclear bomb that went off here. And then that's why the war happened here. There's lots of plausibilities of how because the enemy is really good at diversion. When something happens, oh, no, don't look at that. Look at this over here. Or he'll try to reason it away. It's, I hate to say it, but it's kind of like the news media. If something really important is happening in the world, oh, look, a mosquito, type of a thing, over here. Don't look at that. And so something in my mind tends to believe that when that happens, when Yeshua returns and every eye sees him, the enemy will do everything he can to say, no, it wasn't that. It was just this, and then the end begins, But I think for true believers, and please understand, true believers, the 7 churches, they were true believers. They just weren't ready. Not there's 6, at least 5 of the churches were not ready. Church of Smyrna, I don't know why they have to suffer what they did, because it seems like he had no reprimand for them, and he had no reprimand for Church of Philadelphia either. But the point being is, those other churches, they're still believers. So I believe for those who are truly believers and maybe not ready, they're going to see. And just as Yeshua opened the eyes of the disciples after he was with them, okay, because it says, I'm thinking it's Luke 24, where it says he opened their understanding to understand everything that he had said. They had just walked with him all that time. They're preaching the gospel, okay, with Yeshua. And then but yet they didn't understand. It wasn't until after the resurrection that he opened their understanding. I think it's in Luke 24:10, if I'm not mistaken. He opened their understanding afterwards. And then what do you see with the Apostle Paul? He's out with a full vengeance against Yeshua and all believers. And then what happened? He smote them down, on the road to Emmaus. I think it was not the road to Emmaus. I forget what road it was now. Forgive me. But he's going to persecute people. And then Yeshua himself, opens his eyes, opens his understanding. I really believe it's very possible that when the apocalypse happens, the unveiling, that Yeshua will take the scales off of everybody's eyes who are struggling at this moment or rejecting, and they're going to see, and I think that will cause most likely the greatest revival in the world, which will in turn cause the greatest persecution in the world via the anti-Messiah. Because if you look in Revelation or Acts, man, revival was taking place. And then that's when the persecution happened. That's why he dispersed them to get the word out all over the world, of course. And so I think it's very possible that, this is something we haven't, because I confess here, I've heard, big preachers and teachers always talk about, the end time revival. We're seeing it now. No, you're not seeing it. If anything, I think we're seeing a falling away. But whenever the apocalypse happens, the scales are removed. I think that will be, possibly the greatest revival. And it even says, that the angel who goes forth, proclaiming the gospel, and then that's when the end comes, the end at the very end, when the truth has been preached all around the world. I think that's a perspective we need to maybe keep in mind. I'm not saying it's right, but I do believe it's something we need to keep in mind.
Well, we got some questions from the chat, and I'd like to get into those.
Cool.
And the first question was in regards to the anti-Catholic question, or sorry, I'm misreading this. Where do we find the teaching evil people?
You can go to our website. If I can get there, so I can kind of walk people through it. If you go to our website, you'll go to the teachings tab, and then you'll see Steve's teachings, and then all of Steve's teachings. And then it'll be under Off the Cuff series. And you'll also find it in the latest teachings really quickly there. But for those who may be watching this down the road and its time has passed, it'll be under the Off the Cuff series down that. And it's again called Evil People. That teaching, it went off the hook. When we released it, it had like over 3,000 views in just one weekend. It was crazy.
That's awesome. We
Yeah.
have another question coming in. If our pursuit of feast days and Shabbat is preparation for his coming in our sealing, was our life in sin and unbelief the mirror image, e.g., preparing for the mark of the beast?
Good question. I think anything that is outside of the Father is a preparation of the mark of the beast. Um, but let's what is the mark going to be? I don't know. We all know, the Torah says, that we are to write this as symbols on our hands and our foreheads. So therefore, could the mark of the beast be something simply just being an imitation of that? I could see that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a chip. Now, I'm those who are on the chip thing, I'm with you. I can see it. I'm not saying it's wrong either. But I do believe there's something to be said about the mentality of, the image of the beast. The mark of the beast will be similar to what our mark is, that being the Torah. So it could be a fake, if you will, or an imitation type of a thing. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm kind of belabored this. Forgive me. The question is basically, could our life outside of the Torah be that? I could see it, definitely. My greatest concern, I have a teaching called Satan's Greatest Masquerade, because I believe, and I really mean this with all my heart, I really believe this, that there's the understanding that people are waiting for this Antichrist to come and set up this confirming a covenant. Okay. Well, the word for confirming in Daniel chapter 9 there is actually higber. It means to strengthen a covenant, not to make a new covenant. That's a big difference. So, and in that teaching, Satan's Greatest Masquerade, I show how Daniel 9 is all about Messiah, not anti-Messiah. I know that goes against so many people's understanding, but that teaching explains it. There's a part 2 to that teaching, Satan's Greatest Masquerade and Satan's Greatest Masquerade part 2. And if there's anything to answer your question, I think what has been setting us up for that deception is walking in the ways of the church. I know that kind of goes against some people, but there's a mentality that the church has prepped us for. And because when we think of the Antichrist, and let's backtrack. Okay. I know whenever I was in the church back in the day, and the Antichrist was the bad guy, right? And he's going to do all these bad things. Okay. But Yeshua said the very elect would be deceived if that were possible. Okay. How is one deceived? You're deceived by believing it's the real thing. Well, if this Antichrist comes giving something that we know is not right, well, then how can the very elect be deceived? So the Antichrist is going to come forth looking like the real thing. So therefore, I believe this Antichrist figure that the church has, I always say brainwashed, but led us to believe it's going to look like this. Well, when it doesn't happen that way, and then all of a sudden here's this Messiah figure saving the day, and he's not looking like that, he can deceive people. And so, wow, I'm really belaboring this. I'm sorry. I guess the answer to the question is yes, I think, but not just, that. It's the where the church has brought us to. And I'm not, saying that if you're in the church, you're not going to make it. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying that mindset is leading us to be deceived. That's my concern. That being regarding about the Antichrist. Does that make sense? Hopefully, Jake, I'm making
something very fascinating you brought out in the last interview we did was the kind of the parallel between modern world holidays that are redesignated paganism in Christianity, or even just heathens that keep those particular holidays, and the biblical feasts. And something they're bringing out in this question is if the pursuit of feast days and Shabbat is preparation for his coming and sealing,
good call.
Being these holy days that are not found in Scripture, such as Christmas and Easter and Valentine's Day and Halloween, could these be preparing for the mark of the beast? Since Scripture does say that the Sabbaths are a sign between us and the Father,
Amen.
Could those holidays be a sign between those who are blind and are going to follow the Antichrist?
That's very good. That's a very good point. Yeah, that all makes good sense. So, in essence, was she? If, I don't know who was he or she who asked that question. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. All the more with what you just brought in, it all lines up. It's all a preparation under those feast days, meaning the world's feast days, like you said.
We had another question, and they were asking, I want to understand the verse when in Judea flee to the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just focusing to that geographic area today, or is this a worldwide applicable verse in regards to whenever you see the abomination of desolation, flee into the mountains? Is that just for that geographic location, or is this something that believers should be taking into account worldwide?
That's a brilliant question. Um, I've wondered the same thing, and it's definitely geographical, okay, because that's where he will be, all right, and to our understanding as it stands right now. And so I definitely believe it's geographical for sure. The question I think is it only geographical? And I would think that if we see, let's just say we're out of the land, okay, and we see that time. I know me, I'm going to flee to the mountains wherever I can because we know Revelation 13 says he's given authority to conquer the saints wherever they're at. Not just, and that's not geographical, the saints, period, everywhere. So I believe if you see that time coming, yeah, you need to flee, to safety wherever, because life is going to get hard at that moment in time. It's already, I think it'll already be hard at that time, but it will get a whole lot harder at that moment in time. Did I answer that question legitimately?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And it wouldn't it wouldn't hurt you if even if it was focused on that geographic location to go camping for a while and
That's right.
fill things out, because if things do fall down, then you definitely want to be in a place that you can preserve your family and
Mm-hmm.
those you care about, and not be like, well, I wish I'd fled to the mountains because I was just thinking that was for Judea. So
Well, and something else too. A topic gets brought up quite often is, should we be preparing for food and water and this, that, and the other? And one, I will say I was a big prepper, especially when I lived in Costa Rica. Man, we had a lot of food and stuff prepped. When we moved, well, we got rid of that. And so, but even to this day, let's take end times completely out of the picture. Should we be prepping to at least something? Hard times come. I mean, earthquake can happen, or a tornado can wipe you out here and mess up this, and you want to have something to fall back on, right? I think that's only kind of using wisdom. But now I'll have people saying, well, I got this much here because I think we're going to have it for the tribulation time. Very possible. I believe that. But I don't think everyone is called to that either, because I believe quite possibly that those who, my opinion, I'm still, my pre-trib view of the rapture is not the same as your typical Christian pre-trib view. But I still believe they will be taken to the place prepared. But let's just say that doesn't happen. Okay, let's just assume for a moment I'm completely wrong. A lot of people will say, yeah, that's right, you're wrong. And that being the case, I believe that just as he provided for the children of Israel walking through the desert with manna and water, he will provide for his people just the same. I will not be surprised that manna will be falling again for his people wherever they're at, if they don't have those provisions. Now, I don't say, trust that only, because that's just Steve's opinion. If the Father puts on your heart to prep, then you should prep. If you haven't, you don't have that burden, burning within you, then stay open to him, and just make sure you're following his lead. Anytime I see people saying you have to do that, well, maybe you do because he put it on you. Pray for those who aren't doing it, and that they'll have that wisdom and they'll follow the Lord. The biggest thing is, Yeshua said to all 7 churches, let him who has ears hear what the Spirit says. Boom. That's it. Those 7 churches already knew Torah. Okay. They knew. Okay. It's all about listening to the Spirit. And that's what we need to be doing.
Now we have some people in the chat saying there are going to be some who will stand and testify and probably be martyred. And there will also be those who will go to a place that's of safety, prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And we see all over the world, there are people who are given that desire from God to prepare places of refuge.
Agreed.
And there are also going to be those who need a place of refuge.
Correct.
See it both sides of people who are going to be taken to a place prepared and those who right now are preparing a place.
That's right. It's so funny. I'm so glad you brought that up and that they're saying that, because I got a good friend and she has a basement full of food, guns, ammo, you name it, she's got it. And she's been doing it for quite some time. And it was about a year or two ago, maybe 2 years ago, we were talking and she said, you know what? She goes, I've been doing all this and I'm still doing it. She goes, but I'm not doing it for me. I go, what do you mean? She goes, the Father told me I'm doing this for someone else. I don't know who it is. And so it's like, I believe those who are preparing these places and stuff, their mindset is they're needing it for them. When in reality, because of their heart and their passion that they're doing it for the Father's people, that may be the very reason why he takes them out, but it's there for the people who are left behind. I don't know. But I'm with you. That's the Father is, and that's why it goes back to make sure you're doing what the Spirit is telling you to do. And don't judge someone because they're not doing what you're doing. Maybe the Spirit's not putting it on them. Okay, maybe he is, and they're ignoring it. We don't know that. We can't judge that. We can't read their mind. We don't know what the Father's telling them. But we're accountable. It reminds me of when Peter, he was talking to Yeshua, and he points his finger over at John. Well, what about him? Yeshua says, hey, what about him? You do what I told you to do. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to be focusing on what he's telling us. If we're doing that, we're good.
Fantastic. And our last question was from Chad Schaefer, and he was asking if you'd ever heard of the book, The World in the Bondage of Egypt.
No, but it's funny because the bondage of Egypt, because, okay, if he's out there listening, I believe the U.S. is likened unto Egypt, okay, because it's in Jeremiah. I'm thinking I'm right. It's in Jeremiah where it talks about, and then Egypt even gets destroyed by Babylon. But then then the question is, well, is that in time? Well, yeah, it's in time because Babylon gets destroyed too, but Egypt gets destroyed first. And I did a teaching, and it was a podcast. I made it into a video. Oh, goodness gracious, I forgot the name of it. I'm so sorry. But I talk about all these parallels, how, let me look it up real quick for those who might want to look it up. Why I should say we are Egypt, and how the parallels and the bondage that Yahweh's people are in. And it's like this. People say we're living in freedom. Okay. There are freedoms. Okay. And I'll grant that. But to say that we are in freedom, well, I struggle with that. There's a bondage because someone who owns land, let's say you pay your land off completely. Do you know you really don't own it? Because the government owns it. If you don't pay taxes, you lose that land. So the question is, do you own it? Well, no. The government owns it. You're just leasing it from them via the taxes. And so there's so many things. Let me find this teaching real quick. And Signs in the Heavens is what it's called. It's got signs in the heavens. No, I can't be it. Is that it? I'm looking it up real quick. Forgive me. I just want to make sure that it's called Signs in the Heavens, and it's got a question mark, and it's talking about last year, because last fall everyone's talking about the blood moon and the sign and the Virgo giving birth and all this stuff, and I believe those things are significant, but not on the timing that they believe. Okay, and that's where it leads to today, and I go into that teaching showing how America has so many parallels with Egypt. And it's in the latter part of the teaching because I grew up in an area of the U.S. in the Midwest that was called Little Egypt. And I break it down. And I remember driving on a road called Goshen Road, never even paying attention that, hey, Goshen, land of Goshen, never clicked, never once clicked with me. And so then I started digging into it. There are so many parallels with the land of Egypt. So, no, I have not heard of that book. I would love to check that book out because I bet he's got a ton more information that I even dug into. So, I'll need to look that up.
Awesome. And that was our last question for this interview. Is there any final thoughts you want to share regarding this topic and what you've been researching?
You know, regarding timelines, I think we should always look at them and take them with a grain of salt, but don't throw them out the window. And I think this year is significant for multiple reasons over. And I just pray that people will, if they watch that last teaching that we did, here now, no more delay. Hopefully they'll keep all of this in perspective, because that timeline is still plausible. And if it's not, keep it in prayer for how we can apply that timeline to another calendar that may be more or just downright correct and mine is wrong, and see how these things apply for another year and years down the road. And the biggest thing is our heart. We need a humble heart. If there's anything that I think is lacking in the body of Messiah today, it's a humble heart. And everyone wants to say they're right and they're right here, and they might be. Present it in a humble attitude. That's how people will receive you. That's how people will want to hear what you've got to say. I who am I to declare myself right on whatever issue? I've already proven myself wrong on so much of my theology over the last several years. So knowing that alone, knowing we've all were lock solid. Take ourselves 10 years ago, all of us. We all thought we were right. We got our theology right. We're right, and we're declaring it as fact and truth, right? Well, a couple of years later, we realized, well, maybe I was wrong. Well, knowing that we had to humble ourselves then, we might be having to humble ourselves now on something else that we believe right here and now. So all I ask for all of us, whenever digging into the truth, don't be so solid that your truth that you are holding onto right now is 100% correct. We're all wrong on something. We're all right on something. Let's let the Father work in our hearts with a humble heart. I'll close with that.
And for this timeline, where can people find the timeline that you were referring to from the past interview if they want to check this out, since it can be cross-applicable to years in the future and these other times?
Yes. If you go to our website, torahfamily.org, and you'll go to the top teaching, where the line there, it says teachings. When you click on the teachings, you'll go to Steve's teachings. And I'm pulling it up now just to make sure. And then you'll see all Steve's teachings. So it's teachings, Steve's teachings, and then all Steve's teachings. Currently, it's under the newest tab where it says no more delay. And then if it's not there, depending on when you see this particular teaching, it will be under the live teachings, and it'll be the top one. And right now it's called no more delay under the live teachings under Steve's teachings.
Well, Steve, thank you for coming on Now You See TV, and thank you everybody for watching. We appreciate our audience and for tuning in. So thank you, and shalom, everybody.